Hi, thank you for joining this BIP Chat, Business is Personal conversation. And I'm having it with Helene Sewell, who, yes, I know if you're watching this, you'll see her name has got Helene. She is French, but she's been living in Britain a long time and has adopted the Helen. So I just want to say that before anybody tries to correct me for not being respectful of the name. So I'm Penny Power, and I am the proud co-founder, owner of BIP 100, which is Business is Personal. Anybody that's watching this on YouTube will see that we've got my book behind me, Business is Personal. And as an entrepreneur for many, many years, over 30 years, I've certainly seen that business is not a linear experience. And my husband and I, for over 25 years, have supported business owners, particularly experts, navigate the world of business ownership by being inside a community, which is very different to being inside a network. A community is much more sense of belonging, support. We almost call it a super PAC, and it's for those people who are sort of tend to be lone wolves and actually come into a place where you can get business friendship. And Helen is one of our very valued members. And we only interview our members because we have already put these people through quite a rigor to make sure that A, they are experts, and B, that they have values that is based around the fact that we need to balance our lives between business and our personal. And that is Business is Personal. And today with Helen, I have been so excited about this conversation because it's about business, and it's about what is it like running a business, but it's also starting to look at maybe we should be aware of the fact that we could be on the spectrum of some neurodivergent challenges. And I know we're hearing a lot about it. You know, have I got ADHD? Am I on a spectrum of autism? But the reality is that when we start to identify some of these gaps that we might have in our business acumen, or why are we not flowing in business in the way that we should? It could be that we have some behavior, some habits, some sort of embedded things that really, to a certain extent, aren't our fault. But we can work with them and they can become a superpower. And this is what Helen does as a business mentor, helping entrepreneurs and business leaders really understand how to work with some of their neurodivergent behaviors. So, Helen, I am so excited about this conversation that we're going to have. And I hope anybody who's listening now stays with this, because I think not only it might be very useful for you, but it might be something very useful to pass on to friends and family as well, maybe business colleagues. So let's start off. I think your business journey yourself is really fascinating. You've obviously been very good at business, but good at numbers. So share a little bit about your journey to becoming a mentor in this space.
Okay, so, well, first of all, as you mentioned, I'm French by birth, and I came to the UK right at the end of my studies. I have a master's in business studies with a specialization in finance. And I came to the UK on my own at the age of 22 and started my career from scratch because my qualification wasn't recognized. So I have spent over 20 years of my career working in corporations as what they call a finance business partner. So it's basically somebody who's here to support decision-making through numbers. And I have worked at every level of the hierarchy. My last two positions were finance director for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. The last one was a FTSE 250 company. So, and leader in the market. So really large companies. But it means that, from a business perspective, I have worked and supported decision-making in every discipline of the business. And that's one of the, what's different about me is that I know about and I know the challenges of making decisions in every discipline: sales, marketing, manufacturing, logistics, HR, IT, everything.
Yeah.
So that's given me a really broad sense of business and being able to help people understand what they need to know to make the right decision at the right time.
That's brilliant.
So that's my professional background. But then 20 years in and having achieved my career aspirations, I really realized that there was a sense of not being fulfilled, because I like to work with people who are really passionate about what they do. And the bigger the organization and the less passion you feel, I think. So I came out and I have been working since then, with entrepreneurs. Now the bit around neurodivergence has actually come in later, but just that after a while and looking at who I have been working with and having myself gone through a journey of discovery and education around neurodivergence. I have 2 kids who are neurodivergent, now 19 and 21, and we only established their neurodivergence in their late teens, 16 onwards. So I have learned a lot about it, and then realized that most of my clients are neurodivergent, and I am neurodivergent, and I've never been diagnosed. And my dad was neurodivergent and was never diagnosed, and so is my sister. And there is so many people around me who now I recognize are neurodivergent and have no idea they are. And I seem to work particularly well with people who are neurodivergent, and I guess that's because I understand their challenges. I have overcome some of those challenges myself, and I have supported my kids overcome those challenges in their everyday life, around executive functions and things like that.
It's fantastic. And I think this whole mental health agenda, as well as this real awareness of the fact that we can be on a spectrum of these things, I think it's really helping us to perform better, be happier, be calmer. And certainly when I lifted the lid off with somebody who's very close to me, and we discovered that, definitely the performance and the happiness and the calmness changed a huge amount. Because whilst we don't want to change what our character is, how beautiful it is, how, there's some wonderful aspects of anyone who's got neurodivergence. These are the things that can actually stop their progression in a career or in their business, aren't they?
Well, if you think about the definition of neurodivergence, it means that we are neurologically wired differently to the majority of people. It means that we think slightly differently. And because we are in a minority, we are brought up in an environment where we are expected to think and behave like the majority. And it drives people who are neurodivergent to feel, different, to feel not accepted, to feel inadequate, when in fact, there's nothing we can do about it in terms of we write differently, that's it, you can't change that. But in fact, if we lean into it rather than fight it, then it is absolutely, it brings qualities to life that everybody benefits from. And so why not work with it rather than work against it? But we are, because there was not enough knowledge around it and not enough education around it, especially, our generation, you and I are a bit older, there was my kids, who are now 19 and 21, they have been identified through this, through the schooling process as being neurodivergent, but that never happened for me. That never happened for my dad. And yet there is, understanding it and being able to then lean into it is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and it's also, I always think with anything we discover about ourselves or anything that happens to us in life, is also not labeling ourselves and becoming a victim of that. Really seeing, okay, this is incredible awareness, and as I say, we could be on a spectrum of it in some way. How can I now learn to work with it, which is what you do. Now, you have some fascinating statistics, I know, so I'd love to talk about that. First of all, neurodivergence, we're mostly thinking about people who have got ADHD or autism. Yeah, is that right?
Well, there is ADHD, autism, and dyslexia are the most common.
Right. Okay, that's interesting. The dyslexia.
Because dyslexia also falls into it.
Right.
There are some other less common flavors of neurodivergence, such as dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and some others, but they are much more the minority. But dyslexia is very, very common in entrepreneurship.
So I'd love to go into each one of these in a minute. Now, the statistics you said, I mean, I could reel them off, but I'd much, because you shared them with me earlier. But can you just say those 3 statistics that you shared with me?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so statistics suggest that about 20% of the general population is neurodivergent. Hence, yes, we are in a minority. So that's 1 in 5 amongst us. It is genetic and tends to run in families, by the way. So there could be, you know, if somebody is identified as neurodivergent in a family, then there's probably, you know, a good chance that it runs upwards and it will run downwards in that family. But where it becomes really interesting is that statistics once again suggest that 40% of entrepreneurs are neurodivergent. Now, that's not a surprise because one, you know, as neurodivergent people, we feel a little bit different. 2, we don't fit in as well. And there is a strong sense of independence generally amongst neurodivergent people. So these are all characteristics. And another one, creativity, is one of the superpowers of neurodivergent people. And creativity comes in various, you know, shapes and sizes. But it's really important in entrepreneurship because innovation and creativity go hand in hand. So it's no surprise really that, you know, potentially twice as many, you know, 40% of entrepreneurs are neurodivergent. Now, one of the most shocking statistics I have found is that it's believed that 70% of marketeers are neurodivergent. And that's very much around the creativity piece.
Yeah.
Because in marketing, it's, you know, it's a lot about creativity and connections. And people who are neurodivergent are very, very good at it. So whether they are, you know, running their own business or not, you know, when I talk about marketeers, I mean employed and self-employed marketeers, 70% neurodivergent. So I found that statistics absolutely astounding.
Yeah, and it does make sense, as you say. It all makes sense. The reason people become entrepreneurs, the reason people become marketeers, it all makes complete sense. So now across these, the 4 or 5 that you said, you know, the strongest ones, the ADHD, the autism, dyslexia, I think those are the top 3 probably. And then you said dyspraxia and
dyscalculia.
Yeah. Are there any common traits between them all? Is there anything that's common to them all?
I would say creativity is common. Now, quite often, creativity in autism is more what I would call engineering creativity. So it's more around structure and problem solving. So you find a lot of autism, for example, in IT. Whereas the other flavor of creativity is around, you know, artistic creativity, and that's where you find more ADHD in marketing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I don't like to stereotype.
No, I know, but it helps to have these hooks. It does help us to have these hooks, and so these are strengths. I see these are great strengths as long as you're doing the right job, you know. And are there any common challenges across them all, or do us each have a different type of challenge?
Well, a common challenge that you find amongst most of those people is challenges around what they call executive functions.
Right.
So time management.
Right.
Time blindness is very common around the whole spectrum of neurodivergence. And what I mean by time blindness is you either get completely lost in a task and forget about time, or you can't manage your time and you forget appointments and you know, and time becomes something that you can't quite grasp. So you either can't focus on something, or you hyper focus for, you know, way longer than you expected it. And you find that in both autism and ADHD. Very often, dyslexia is attached to another type of neurodivergence. It's quite rare to find dyslexia on its own. It often goes hand in hand with ADHD and sometimes with autism. So dyslexia obviously is an issue around perception and the ability to read and absorb information in written format.
That's me, by the way. It really is.
But the worrying thing around dyslexia is that because it wasn't tested anywhere as much as it should be, there's a lot of people who have spent a large period of their life thinking that they were thick because they couldn't learn to read the same way as neurotypical people. It's not that they can't learn to read, it's that they need to learn differently, and potentially they need to have it written in a different way. So you have fonts that are better suited to people who are dyslexic, for example.
Wow, how interesting.
Yeah. And understanding that obviously you can then help yourself by surrounding, yourself and living in an environment that fits the way you see the world. Because you can't change how you see the world as a dyslexic person.
And it's interesting how many of us will have naturally adapted our environment and the way that so for me, I think one of my, without it looking like I'm being smug, but one of my superpowers is my communication skills, my verbal communication skills. And I think it's in life, that was the only way that I was able to survive in the academic system and enabled me to learn from people rather than like I'm learning from you. If you gave me a book on this, it would sit like a high pressure on my desk for so long. But having the opportunity to talk things through, and also I find I was the why child in the classroom. I always needed the context I wasn't happy to just accept information. I needed to attach it to something.
So, and that is very common to dyslexia. Very common.
That makes me a storyteller. The way I share in keynotes and anything is I'm a storyteller, because that's how I assume probably the world needs to learn, because that's how I need to learn. So it's interesting how we adapt. So now let's talk about ADHD, because this one I'm really fascinated by. Hannah, our daughter, has been very public about the fact that she, as an entrepreneur, who's a very bright girl and very passionate about what she does, but her creativity has been the thing that's blurred her, because she will just keep creating stuff. And since she has focused in, so is that creative gene, is it very strong in a lot of ADHD people?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Creativity is definitely, and more often than not, artistic creativity is quite developed and prominent in people with ADHD. Now, we were talking before about characteristics of certain types of neurodivergence. I'd like to say my personal viewpoint on the terminology of ADHD, which I believe is very, very misleading.
Right.
Because attention deficit, it's not that there is generally an attention deficit.
No.
It's that there are certain things that ADHD people find difficult to focus on, or times of day or environments, but they are equally capable of being hyper-focused and time blind. So there is no lack of attention. There is a challenge as to when the attention is and the focus is there. And the hyper, the hyper disorder, people think when they hear hyper disorder that this is somebody who is externally hyper, and it's you can see the energy. In some people it's the case, but not everybody. And the hyper thing is as much internal as it is external.
Yeah, I love that.
Because it's the voice in the head that doesn't shut up.
Yeah.
That is a challenge for so many people. And that is why it brings a challenge around attention, because when you have a constant dialogue a constant chatter going on in your brain, it can make it incredibly difficult to then be able to pay attention to something else. So understanding that people who are ADHD have got this constant multitude of ideas going on in their head that's the hidden part of the hyper part, you know, of ADHD. But it's really important to understand it, because on one side, it makes them incredibly capable of making connections between things that neurotypical people want, because their brain is on overdrive most of the time. So that's the superpower.
So that's a great problem solver.
That's a great problem solver, and it makes them fantastic innovators. Because they will make connections between, this has been solved here, and there is the problem there, and we put the two together, and bang. And often, you know, they come up with incredible solutions that, you know, seems obvious to the rest of the world once you found them, but they were never there before until they thought about it. And that's, you know, that's very, very interesting in my view. So not to think that it's just external. And not
when somebody has, when they come to you as a client, as a typical sort of case study, if you can ever have a typical one, and you identify that it's the reason they're just, you know, throughout all their brilliance, they're just not getting the peace and the success. They've got that unrequited success sense. The ADHD people, what is it that's mostly challenging them? From a business context, what is it that's holding them back?
So there are several challenges they have. One of them is generally that they have so many ideas that they spread themselves too thin.
Yes.
And it drives them nuts, because they can't choose.
Yeah.
And one thing that I help, you know, particularly ADHD people with, is help them understand their personal why, so that they can see what bit of what project aligns with that, and then help them actually focus maybe one or two activities that really fulfill their why, rather than having half a dozen that each fulfill part of what, you know, what they like. So that's one of the challenges they have, which can be a positive when understood and managed well, but is a negative when they let all those ideas run loose and pursue them all. And the other thing that, you know, ADHD in particular is a challenge for in business is the tendency at procrastinating and not being able to manage their time and energy. One thing that's very common in ADHD is peaks and troughs, that they will have a burst of energy and focus on something and do it, and then they will crash. And when they crash, there's nothing they can do. So whatever they had in the diary, they can't face it. So they live with a lot of guilt around, why could I do this and now I can't do that?
Oh, yeah, that's really tough. Yeah.
And understanding that means that they can then start to build their days better, build their diaries around, you know, the peaks and troughs that they can sometimes predict, and also having more forgiveness for themselves for when they do hit the trough, that they need the rest, because they are expending so much energy when they are in peak, that they need the trough and they need the rest, and then to look after their body in a way that supports their ADHD rather than go against it. There's a lot of issues around hormones, especially with females. There's a lot of issues around, you know, the use of caffeine because of this constant noise going in the brain. You know, it's not unusual to find people with ADHD. Once again, I don't want to, you know, I'm not generalizing here, but it is quite often found that people either have tendencies to addictions. Now, I'm not saying everybody who's ADHD is a drug addict.
No, I
Don't,
know.
that's not at all
Funny
what I said,
it's a
but
question I had.
addictions to things and some substances, including caffeine, including energy drinks, which are, there's nothing illegal about them, but the problem is that they actually make it worse, not better.
Yeah.
Because yes, they might help to come out of a trough, and they will send you back into a peak, but then the next trough will be even worse.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's so it must be very much linked to the dopamine, the dopamine chemical.
Right.
Because you're describing that from what I've learned about dopamine.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
the ADHD people, are they very high in dopamine and then they absolutely drop?
There is like an addiction to dopamine with ADHD, and being able to regulate that is, then it empowers people with ADHD rather than make them the victim of it.
And to regulate, is it about really looking at some of the behavioral habits and how can you structure yourself? Because you touched on this, build habits, manage your days better, understand, forgive yourself, all of these things. I suppose when you're mentoring someone in this, you're helping them to rebuild better habits and better self-talk. And
yeah, absolutely. And there are daily habits that are very important to embed. And I know that you have some of those habits yourself around meditation, because it helps reduce the noise in the head by having a habit of daily meditation. There are certain foods that and that include caffeine and things like that make things worse and need to be potentially avoided. But everybody's different.
yeah.
And exercise is also very, very good, because it gives you that dose of dopamine that you need. So
In a positive way.
doing it at the right time.
Yeah, yeah.
Not at 10 o'clock at night, because it will impact your sleep.
Yes.
Often people with ADHD also have issues with sleep.
Yes.
So having that, hygiene of life that supports the ADHD rather than fights it is really, really important.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And finally, I mean, there's loads we could talk about, but autism. So that's one that I'm not so aware of, but I understand you could be on a spectrum of it, and there are certain traits around autism. Like I've heard they find change quite hard, they need quite quiet sensory challenges, etc. But when people talk about autism, because it's so much talked about with children, it's almost treated as a real somebody's almost very disabled. They go into special schools and things. But on this spectrum, there are some phenomenal business people with
Absolutely.
autism.
Absolutely. I mean, Elon Musk is, of course, one of the most well-known autistic, successful entrepreneur.
I never knew that.
Yeah, yeah. Elon Musk, definitely autistic, absolutely no question about it. And openly so. Richard Branson is ADHD, but Elon Musk is autistic. Now, with autism, yes, there is an adversity to change, but it's not so much the change, it's a lack of warning with change.
Yeah.
Because if you give somebody autistic enough warning and the understanding of why change is good, they will go with it. They don't have a problem with it. But they like planning. So they are, from that point of view, it's very, very good for business, because generally autistic people will do business plans, because it is in their nature to have a plan of what's going to happen.
That's interesting.
So that's a definite advantage.
Yeah.
The sensory piece is absolutely true. And the interesting thing around sensory challenges is that they come and go. I wouldn't say they come and go on a daily basis, but almost. And understanding that and being able to, adapt to it is really, really important, because they are, and it's not just noise, it can be light as well.
Yeah.
So I know, for example, my kid absolutely hates going into supermarkets, because it is, from a sensory perspective, it is tremendously uncomfortable. And it's both the noise and the light.
It's
So
really, you say that, because I know someone that's sort of on the spectrum of it, loves Waitrose, can't stand Sainsbury's or any of the other ones, and there must be something about the lighting.
Yeah, exactly. The busyness of the place and the lighting is really important. Now, but it just means that people, once people understand it, they can adapt to it. My kid lived most of the time with noise cancelling headphones. But it's about understanding how to then communicate with them. The best way to communicate with my kid is to send them a message on the phone, even when we're in the same house.
Yeah.
I know it sounds strange, but it works better for them. So why not do it? Because on the other side, when it comes to autism, one of the things around autism is that they have a sense of curiosity that goes beyond any people who are neurotypical, and it means that they will research a topic to much greater depth than a neurotypical person, and it makes them incredible experts, incredibly knowledgeable, because they will actively go and seek the information and accumulate as much knowledge about a particular topic as they can. So I don't like the terminology, but an anorak, a train spotter. Most train spotters are likely to be on the spectrum, as in real ones. I mean, as opposed to using it as a terminology, because they have this thirst for knowledge and information. Now, when it comes to building a business where knowledge is the value that you have, that you share, it's very, very valuable. It makes them really good. And they also have, this ability, because of the amount of, generally they absorb, often you see they have very, very good memory, and they absorb a large amount of data. They have a thirst for knowledge, and they make those connections as well. So it makes them great innovators, hence Elon Musk. Because they can be very technically minded, and they absorb this incredible amount of data that they then process and turn into a new idea.
Amazing. Gosh, I bet anybody that's been listening to this, I know they will be able to identify people they know, they'll identify traits in themselves. And so the way that you work as a business mentor in here is that I imagine you do a lot of listening to gather, to understand where they are with their business, where their challenges are. And to work in a typical way with someone in terms of how long you work with them, or is it just very personal to each person?
It's very personal to each person, yes. I don't actually have a typical package. I sell bundles of sessions to my clients, but I worked almost differently with every one of my clients. I have kind of a toolkit that I bring along, but I never know which tool I might be bringing out in any given day. Sometimes we have planned for it, especially with autism. So, we will have said, we're going to do this, then we're going to do that. And we may or may not follow that plan. And if we don't, it would be because something else has come up that's more urgent that they're comfortable doing instead, which is absolutely fine. And then some other people, especially with ADHD, I might have, I have a client I'm thinking of specifically, and I have been working with her for 18 months, and we meet fortnightly for 90 minutes. And there is no, I never know what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah.
But every time she's got a business been going for 7 years. She had no idea she was ADHD. 18 months later, working with me, she's coming to terms with the idea that it's probably ADHD. But you know, she's not keen on the label, and I said that's fine. We don't have to call it a label. But every session is, you know, she can say, "Oh, this is what's happened in the last 2 weeks." And then and she's no, and the mind is all over the place. And I will ask her some questions, and I will challenge her. And I say, so where are you going next? And she said, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and I might challenge her as to why she's chosen to do this or that. And I will help her, because she's more often than not, she's way in the weeds basically, and she's only looking about this far. And what I help her do is, instead of looking this far, I help her look this far. And I say, right, so yes, you've got this sorted, that's great. But once you've got that, you're going to need this as well. Oh, yes. And to have this, then you need to start working on it now. Oh, yes, you're right. And by the end of the session, she's got clarity on what she needs to do for the next 2 weeks.
Brilliant.
That she didn't have when we started. And that's how almost every session goes.
Yeah,
but that's quite, you know, that's specific to her, because that's what she needs. But whatever my client needs, whatever gap they have in their skills, that's what I'm here to fill.
Yeah, and help them build behaviors that make them feel better. And I think that's the key thing, because you started off saying, you know, people with neurodivergent challenges can feel very isolated, and we don't see the best of them because they feel, well, you used all sorts of shame, guilt, you know, and I think it's beautiful that you do this work. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Anybody who's listened to us, please contact me if you'd like to have a chat with Helen. Amazing lady to talk to. I think, you know, with this statistic, 20% of the population are neurodivergent, 40% of entrepreneurs are seen as being, and there was great substance to why that is the case. Yeah, get in touch with Helen. You can find her on LinkedIn. What's your website? Remind us of your website, Helen.
So my website is the-business-navigator.com. But if you put the Business Navigator in Google, you'll find me. There's only
absolutely
one.
brilliant.
And then in terms of LinkedIn, there's actually only one, Helen, Helene Sewell, on LinkedIn. So as long as you put the E at the end of the first name, you'll find me.
And of course, you can contact me if you would like to have a chat with me, and I can introduce you, because I've got to know Helen really well within the community, conversations we've had, and yeah, I've got a lot of trust in you. So thank you so much for your time. I've absolutely loved this conversation with you, and I hope you've all enjoyed it as well.
It's been a pleasure being here with you today, and thank you for the welcome and the opportunity.
Oh, you're very welcome.